Pepsi Prebiotic Cola in original and cherry vanilla. That Pepsi taste you love with no artificial sweeteners and 3 grams of prebiotic fiber. Pepsi Prebiotic Cola. Unbelievably Pepsi.
Good morning. It's Tuesday, the 21st of April, and this is the Brussels Playbook Podcast. The vibe in Brussels today is unleashed. Will today be the first time in years that EU foreign ministers actually feel like they can say what they want? Also on the podcast today, we'll give you the lowdown on the election results in Bulgaria. Spoiler alert, another EU country might be turning towards Russia. And with Brussels urging Europeans to cut back on travel to save fuel, members of the European Parliament are questioning what the hell they're doing dragging themselves to Strasbourg every month. I'm joined today by our policy editor, Sarah Wheaton. Sarah, do you go to Strasbourg very much?
I used to go pretty regularly when Commission President Ursula von der Leyen kept having no confidence votes.
Yeah. I'm Ian Wishart, Political Senior EU Politics Editor. Sarah's with me today. Sarah, we'll start to talk about the Foreign Affairs meeting, which is happening in Luxembourg today. And this is sort of a crucial one because it's obviously the first since the Hungarian elections just over a week ago now. And that could change the mood completely because it might be one of the first in years without the Hungarian Foreign Minister Peter Szijjártó in the room.
Yeah, and I mean, look, these ministers come and go as governments change. That's normal, but this one might actually feel different. I'm not even talking about how they felt about the guy personally, but it's more that it's possibly the first fact in years where ministers feel like they can actually speak freely. You know, there were these reports that Szijjártó was passing information from these meetings to Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. And diplomats were pretty open about the fact that they were holding back on sensitive points.
Yeah, we saw all these reports of sort of the last month or two, really, sort of in the weeks up to the election in Hungary, that certain member states were having small groups because they were too scared to sort of talk at 27. So that might be what might change.
This had been whispered about for years.
Yeah. The agendas are packed today in Luxembourg. It's a meeting chaired, as usual, by Kaja Kallas, the EU's foreign policy chief. Ukraine high up on the agenda. They'll be joined by the Ukrainian foreign minister, Andrei Shcherbya. He's joining by video. There'll be discussions on the 20th sanctions package against Russia, because obviously under Viktor Orbán, when he was prime minister, Hungary always used to challenge these sanctions or delay them. And the big one, the 90 billion euro loan for Ukraine, the new prime minister, the incoming prime minister, Peter Magyar, has said he won't block it. And we reported last night, in fact, Sarah, that this loan, the green light now looks imminent because it's on the agenda for ambassadors to talk about tomorrow. And that's the formal EU hurdle that it needs to pass.
Well, that's going to be a huge shift. Another big shift that we could see is actually with the focus on the Middle East. Lebanon's prime minister is going to be there talking to ministers. You know, the country has been under constant bombardment by Israel, which is trying to root out Hezbollah. But that war is exacting a major civilian toll. And so the prime minister is likely going to be pushing for more EU support.
And speaking of Israel, without Szijjártó in the room, with Orbán on his way out, Israel might be facing some more decisive responses from the EU. Since the war in Gaza started, the EU hasn't really acted decisively. That might change. Kaja Kallas actually hinted at this at a press conference yesterday when she said without Hungary, there could be possible sanctions, things like visa bans and asset freezes against Israeli settlers in the West Bank who have been attacking Palestinian communities, displacing civilians and destroying property. Hungary have been blocking all that. And this is one of the things that we've been talking about for a while, really, that with Orbán gone, that could change.
The other thing we're going to be watching is the EU's formal relationship with Israel itself. So the EU has this deal called an association agreement with Israel, and it's kind of like a mini trade deal plus other stuff. And the EU had a debate about ending it last summer that went nowhere, but now Spain is planning to relaunch this effort. Slovenia and Ireland are supporting Spain in this effort. They've sent a letter calling for the suspension of this deal. You know, there's still some countries that are very resistant to doing this, saying, look, we need to kind of maintain a dialogue with Israel. I think Germany especially, it's still going to be a long time before they would back something like that. But we're really going to be watching the tone in the room.
Yeah, and there's many things on the agenda. Kaja Kallas is also going to brief them on her recent trip to the Gulf. There's obviously these ongoing worries about what's happening in the Strait of Hormuz, whether it's still blocked or not, what the EU can do about that, what pressure they can put on, the discussion on reinforcing the EU naval mission Aspida. So there's a lot to do today. Sarah, have you ever been to Bulgaria?
I have. I've been to Plovdiv,
Actually,
at our colleague Christian Oliver's suggestion.
There's a lot of ruins there, isn't there?
Beautiful town.
Yeah, it's nice. We're going to talk about Bulgaria now because last week we were talking about how Rumen Radev was the front runner to win the elections, the former president, an ex-fighter jet pilot. He's only gone and won it, and by a large margin as well. This is significant because he's likely to probably turn Bulgaria back towards Moscow. When he was president, he didn't criticize Russian invasions of Ukraine. He did condemn EU sanctions on Russia, so that's what Europe is dealing with here.
But you can't deny the results, especially by Bulgarian standards. He got around 45% of the vote, with most of the ballots counted, way ahead of everybody else. He's not excluding forming a coalition with pro-EU parties to make the government more stable. And that's especially if they agree to help him fight corruption, which is certainly something that Brussels would get behind.
Do you know what? For the EU, it must... What was it called? Whack-a-mole, is it? For the EU, it must feel like it's continuously sorting out one problem and thinks it's sorted out one problem, getting rid of Orbán after his troublemaking for 16 years. Suddenly another one pops up in Bulgaria, somebody who, wants to turn back towards Moscow.
Yeah, and I mean, Brussels has really been watching this election closely. Commission President Ursula von der Leyen and Council President Antonio Costa both congratulated Radev, stressing Bulgaria's European path. But of course, it might be challenging. It's not just that he's seen as Russia-leaning, but he was also against Bulgaria adopting the euro.
Not surprisingly, some MEPs have been very critical. Austrian Social Democrat MEP Andreas Schieder said, with Radev, the next Putin friend will likely enter the council, and Orbán is thus merely passing the baton. We've got some words from Radev himself, who said this about the relations with the EU after the results were announced on Sunday.
Bulgaria will pay efforts to continue its European path, but believe me, strong Bulgaria in strong Europe needs critical thinking, needs pragmatism, because Europe has fallen a victim to its own ambition to be a moral leader in a world without rules.
So, Sarah, what is very clear is that this will be the least European, the most pro-Russian Bulgarian government since the end of communism. Does this mean trouble for the EU, do you think? It will think it's got another Viktor Orbán on its hands.
I mean, look, I would quibble with that equivalency just a little bit. I mean, what we're hearing from diplomats is that while some say that he'll obstruct, he's also, as one put it, in a different league from Orbán. He's less confrontational, less systematic in blocking decisions. And look, the bottom line is Bulgaria remains heavily dependent on EU funds.
Sarah, while we're talking about elections, let's mention Slovenia as well, because also there we might be looking at a new prime minister who's a little bit Eurosceptic. He's been prime minister 3 times, actually, the populist Janez Janša. He lost the elections last month by 1 vote to Robert Golob, but Golob admitted yesterday that he's unable to form a coalition, so it looks like Janša will give it a go. He's described as a mini Trump, of course. A couple more items on the Politico website this morning. If you're in the mood for a browse, we have a nice profile of Hungary's permanent representative to the EU, Balint Odor. He's been seen as Orbán's fixer for a few years, but could he be on the way out with the changing of the guard in Budapest? And we look at what it might mean that France's former Prime Minister, Gabriel Attal, saying his relationship with the EU industry chief, Stéphane Séjourné, is back on.
We're talking about like actual romantic relationship, not like just,
It's a really tangled web, Sarah. I don't think we want to get into it now, but people certainly can read about it if they want to on the Politico website. And finally, Sarah, Brussels is urging Europeans to cut back on travel to save fuel because of the war in Iran. MEPs are looking at their own consumption, aren't they?
Yep, this monthly traveling circus to Strasbourg is now once again under the microscope.
Has it ever not been under the microscope?
No.
which is a bit ridiculous because it needs treaty change to not go to Strasbourg.
Yeah, and also just completely changing the French mindset because you will have to pry that from the cold, dead hands of the Fifth Republic.
I've always liked going to Strasbourg. It's a nice city. It's nice to get out of Brussels for a few days, don't you think?
Some great cremant.
You know, there's 4,000 lawmakers and their helpers that go every month. Most travel by train, some travel by car. But according to, this is from 2014 actually, a Court of Auditors report, said the commute cost the EU at least 114 million euros a year. That's from 2014, so it's obviously going to be even more now.
Look, this is a pretty good moment, even though we hear this argument pretty regularly, to kind of resurrect it and add a new news peg to it, as we would say. So now we have the hard-right European Conservative and Reformist group collecting signatures for a letter to President Roberta Metsola. They're arguing that Parliament should keep its plenaries in Brussels. Separately, we have 4 Dutch MEPs, varying from left-wingers to the far right. They've made a similar pitch.
They want to save a bit of money. That's okay, isn't it?
You know, the frugals are going to be frugal.
It's not going to happen, though, is it?
No.
Sarah, before we go, yesterday I mentioned that a listener from Cyprus got in touch with us to say that Zoya, our usual host's last name, Sheftalovic, reminds him of a Cypriot sausage called Sheftalia. I really miss Zoya. And guess what? Over in Australia on holiday, Zoya has been listening and checking up on us. I'm sure she has views on me saying I don't like halloumi, and on being compared to a pig stomach sausage. Should we hear them?
Let's listen.
Good morning, Brussels. It's Zoya dialing in from Sydney, finally getting to use the WhatsApp link in the show notes, which is an exciting little adventure for me. Ian, I can't believe I leave you alone for 1 week and you've gone and offended the entirety of the great nation of Cyprus. Wash your mouth out with soap. Halloumi is delicious. No questions asked. Can't say the same thing about Sheftalia, though. There are better ways of eating a sausage, if I'm being honest. Folks, I have been in Sydney having some time with my mum for her birthday, and I'm going to be back with you next week. See you then.
Okay, maybe I don't miss her that much. Before we go, special birthday. Politico Europe turns 11 today, so happy birthday to us. And here's a short message from our editor-in-chief, Carrie Budoff-Brown.
Hey guys, this is Carrie, longtime pod listener. First time dropping you a voice memo, and if there was ever a time to do it, it is today because Politico launched 11 years ago this morning. And I still remember those early days when we were building something new, disruptive, habit-forming, and really we were just figuring things out as we went. But what's been amazing is watching that newsroom grow into something that's truly European with Brussels right at the heart of it. And if you're listening to this podcast, you're part of that too. Follow the debates, the personalities, and all the drama that actually shapes the EU, like the big debate over halloumi that this podcast has chronicled so closely in the last week. So thanks for being with us, and happy birthday to Politico.